If the Laval Rocket can continue to perform like they did in the final week of 2023, the second half of this season could be pretty exciting. Hello and welcome to the first Rocket Hockey Report of the new year. Happy New Year to all of you. And we've got a lot to cover from last week's 3 games that the Laval Rocket played to finish out the calendar year. Also today, special guest Patrick Williams, AHL writer for NHL.com and a features writer for the AHL.com, is here with us today, and he's going to bring us some news from around the league. Kicking off with the Rocket Rewind, if you'll recall last week, I said the key to this 3-game slate that the Rocket had on the calendar to finish 2023 was that they needed to come up with at least two wins in the 3 games. And really, it would go a long way for them if they could win that first game in Belleville to give them a 3-game win streak. They did end up taking away 4 points on the week. They got 2 wins, but neither of those wins did come on Thursday night against the Belleville Senators. They did drop this one. Belleville tends to be a tough place for Laval to play. They don't have a great record when they're visiting the Sens, and so they did drop this one 4-1. It kind of looked like Laval just really wasn't ready for game action after the short Christmas break. Belleville controlled this game pretty much from top to bottom. So then Laval traveled overnight to get back to Place Bell for Friday, where they would be welcoming in the Syracuse Crunch for 2 games, Friday night and Saturday afternoon. This was their first 3 in 3 of the season, playing 3 games in 3 consecutive days. And Syracuse has been sometimes a very tough opponent this season. Other times, Laval has managed to outperform them. Laval delivered for 2 sold-out crowds at Place Bell, more than 10,000 fans packing the building both on Friday night and on Saturday afternoon. With the Montreal Canadiens out of town on their road trip, coming to see Laval hockey, getting to see Arber Xhekaj, getting to see Emil Heineman and some top prospects, absolutely was a popular thing during the week between Christmas and New Year's for hockey fans in the Montreal area. On Friday night, Kasimir Kaskisuo made his season debut, was in net for the Laval Rocket. This was the first game, not only this season did Kaz play, this has been the first game that he played since last March. So a big night for him. His family was in attendance, and he put on a show between the pipes for the Place Bell fans. He helped to backstop the Laval Rocket to a 3-2 victory, and it was a great way to start the 2-game home series for the weekend. So that then took you to Saturday afternoon, another tilt against the Syracuse Crunch, and Jakub Dobeš was back in net for this one. Dobeš looking absolutely strong and confident as well. This time Syracuse looked defeated pretty early into this game, and Laval was able to win this one 4-1. In fact, it was really looking like it was going to be a shutout for Jakub Dobeš, but Syracuse did manage to get that one single goal on the board really in just the final minutes of the game. So an outstanding back-to-back performance against what was the second best team in the North Division on home ice for Laval, finishing out the season with 2 wins. And probably part of the reason for that, a small part of the reason for that, was some roster stability. There were no recalls to Montreal and no real injuries of big impact to the roster. So what has that done for Laval's record? Well, they are now 11-14-3-2. They have finally broken into the double-digit mark in the win column, which is a big achievement for a team who has struggled as much as the Rocket have so far this season. That moves them to 6th in the North. It's the first time that they've been out of the last place position in the North Division for weeks. Still have a ways to go. They're still just in 6th, but it is an improvement. They've also improved to 13th in the Eastern Conference and up to 24th in the league. That might not sound great to the casual fan, but anyone who has followed the Rocket week after week this season knows that that's a big deal for them to start the new calendar year and to kick off the second half of this season. Before we get to the prospect breakdown, where I've got two players who absolutely deserve some attention and credit for their outstanding play this week, since we're talking about teams who are doing well in the standings, it's the perfect time to bring in our dear friend Patrick Williams to the show because the AHL All-Star weekend is really just now a month away, and we now know the 4 coaches who have been named as the honorary coaches and guest coaches for the All-Star weekend. That is, of course, just like the NHL, is determined by teams who are doing the best in the standings league-wide. So yes, if we are going to talk about the AHL coaches who are leading the top teams around the league right now and who's been named as the coaches for the upcoming All-Star Classic, well, then of course, none other than to come in and do that is Mr. Patrick Williams. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and bring up here. We've got 4 coaches who have now, of course, been named as the coaching staff for the 2024 AHL All-Star Classic. I don't think it's, I'm going to just quickly name who they are, and then we can talk about each of them a little bit. I don't think it's going to come to much of a surprise for anyone that Todd Nelson and the Hershey Bears, from the Hershey Bears, is leading the Atlantic Division. Trent Vogelhuber for the North Division. He is the head coach for the Cleveland Monsters, who are still sitting atop Laval's division, the North Division. Over in the Central, it's Texas all the way. The Stars leading that division. That gives Neil Graham top honors as the coach for the Central. And then in the Pacific, probably not too much of a surprise there that Trent Cole and the Calgary Wranglers are leading the way for the Pacific Division. So, Patrick, I think let's first start with the easy one. And that would be Hershey. We've talked about Hershey a little bit before, Calder Cup champions last year, and they're just absolutely, it feels like they are the Boston Bruins from last season. They're just absolutely, there's just doesn't seem to be any stopping Hershey, and with Todd Nelson at the helm.
Yeah, I would say they look considerably better than the team that won the Calder Cup last year, which is probably pretty scary if you're
That's scary.
Anybody or around them in the division or around the league, because last year's Hershey team, like, they were one of those teams that kind of steadily got a little bit better each week, each month, and then kind of hit their stride once the playoffs arrived. This team just like came out of the gate right off the bat, and Todd Nelson, he was concerned about that, hangover from the cup, being a problem earlier in the year, and they've now gotten off to a 27-6 start. That's 818 point percentage. It's the best start in Hershey's 86 seasons of play, which is saying something. Like, this is a team that's had some pretty good seasons. That's won 12 championships, most ever in AHL history, and then they came out and made a statement. There's a possibility too, like, I guess depending on what the Capitals do, that Hershey could get, let's say, Matthew Phillips at some point, who had 36 goals in the AHL last year. So Todd Nelson kind of there is the guy orchestrating everything. He's one of only a handful of people to ever win the Calder Cup as a player, assistant, and head coach. He has four reigns just in the AHL alone.
Wow.
Just master motivator, very player-friendly coach. Very kind of like plain spoken, and he always seems to know how to, like, kind of push those emotional buttons for his team and really get the most out of them. There was no hangover. That's the amazing thing. This was a team that played well almost into July and came back in October and was, like, there was no hangover at all. And a lot of that's due to him. And this Hershey team, like, right now, is positioned at this pace to challenge for some of the top records, single season records for a team in AHL history. In terms of points, wins, point percentage, etc. So a lot of the credit has to go to Nelson.
Well, we know they certainly put on a show when Laval just visited there a couple of weeks ago. That's for sure. We'll see what Laval does the next time they play Hershey. Speaking of Laval, of course, they are in the North Division, so rounding out the Eastern Conference would be the top seed in the North Division. And right now, that's the Cleveland Monsters and Trent Vogelhuber at the helm there behind the bench. Are you surprised at all to see? We know from previous seasons that a lot of times Cleveland has struggled to get out of the basement in the North Division, and they've been leading this division for a while now under Vogelhuber, and they seem to be sticking around up there a little bit.
Yeah, it's on paper, it's not a team that maybe would jump off the page in terms of, tons and tons of high-end veterans and talent and that sort of thing. And, they're missing a fair amount of, players, including their captain, Brendan Gaunce. But it's a very kind of well-structured team. It's a team where several players returned this year from previous seasons. And, just kind of it's one of those, team by committee situations, I like to say. Everybody's chipping in, their part. And a lot of that, I think, is to do with Vogelhuber. Youngest coach in the league, 35, and fairly recently removed from playing. He wrapped up, I believe, in 2018. He was an assistant in Cleveland for a few seasons, just kind of getting his feet wet, and then he took over last year and just. He's a real upbeat, positive guy, like really kind of in tune with today's player. He's, I think a person that relates well to younger players, especially. And, I think, kind of in the bigger picture too, it's obviously Columbus has had a lot of trouble, for years, really.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a real positive sign, or at least a silver lining, really across their entire operation. Having a team in Cleveland where some of your prospects are getting to really kind of showcase themselves and get some wins and success under their belt. And I think that's always a huge part of any team developing. Is getting that winning culture. And I think a lot of times it starts with the AHL club before it eventually works its way. Up top, to the big club, eventually.
So shifting then over to the Western Conference, the Central Division, not so central when it comes to the team who is leading the way. It's not one of those Midwestern teams. It's down in Texas, the Texas Stars and Neil Graham leading the way. What can you tell us about how this team has been performing and Neil Graham's leadership behind the bench?
Yeah, he's a guy I keep waiting for him to get some more attention. And I think maybe just because he doesn't, he doesn't work out of Toronto or, a Canadian market or something like that, where, there's kind of some media push, but if you look at his work since he came into Texas, he came in mid-season back in 2019-20, and he's done some really nice work. I think Thomas Harley's probably one of maybe his best pieces of work, a first round pick who, defenseman, they basically had to take apart his game and rebuild it from, I don't want to say from the ground up, but, fairly considerably. And they did so, and they got him into the NHL. And, you look at, a good young base of prospects like, Maverick Bork, Logan Stankoven, Graham is just, very smart, just, very dialed in, very intense. Again, another young coach that works well with young players. I think that's obviously, it's something we've certainly discussed in the past, a real prerequisite for today's coach. And yeah, he's, I think somebody at some point is going to take notice of him because, he's kind of been very quietly down there in Texas, just, every year kind of send some talent onward to Dallas, and just real bright, real good, obviously, with the details, the video, all that kind of thing, but also really does know how to relate well to his players.
This is Trent Cole's first season behind the bench for the Calgary Wranglers. And he's already, we know the Wranglers last season were a great team in the Pacific Division. They were a very formidable team to play against in what was a pretty competitive division last year, and they seem to be really kind of picking up where they left off last year with Trent Cull.
Yeah, and for him, it's kind of been a chance to, kind of, I don't want to say redeem himself, but, he had kind of a tough run with Utica and Abbotsford, when he was in the Vancouver system. There was some success there, in terms of wins and stuff, but, he kind of took a lot of heat for some player development. And then he was part of the group last year in Vancouver that got swept out midseason along with Bruce Boudreau. So, this was an opportunity for him to kind of, obviously get a fresh start. He walked into a good situation. There's no question, but, it's also, he walked into a good situation and you can mess it up. Right. And he didn't do that. Like he just has been a steady hand on the wheel.
Right.
And, it's really, I think just meshed well with that group. And Calgary again is a team certainly competing, for first overall in the Western Conference along with Dallas. I'm not sure at this point how realistic it is for anyone to catch Hershey, but that aside, it's a team that looks like it's poised to certainly make another good run in the playoffs. I mean, they could have very well been a team that reached the final last year. They just ran into Coachella Valley in a series that went the distance. So, all four. Interesting about the four coaches is three of the four teams are the same that were represented last year in Laval. Hershey, Nelson is returning, Graham is returning, and then obviously last year was Mitch Love in Calgary. This year it's Call. So the only new team that's represented is Vogelhuber with Cleveland. So it's a little bit of a kind of deja vu in some ways, but with enough of a kind of fresh aspect to it to kind of keep things interesting.
Well, it will be interesting to watch how these coaches lead their respective teams at this year's AHL All-Star Classic. We'll start getting some inklings of which players will be involved in that in the coming weeks, because that takes place just about a month from now. So it will we'll be sure to tap your insight and intuition on those players, particularly when we find out who Laval's representative is going to be. Patrick Williams, of course, again, if you're not familiar with his work, be sure to check out the AHL.com. He is the features writer for the AHL. In fact, his latest article this week is his regular Sunday notebook. And if you scroll through it, he does have some information on the one and only Kasimir Kaskisuo for the Laval Rocket. So be sure you head over to the AHL.com, check out Patrick's work. And as always, my friend, we are glad to see you, and we'll have you back again soon.
Thank you. My pleasure as always.
Thanks again to Patrick for joining us. He's always a wealth of information about not only the Laval Rocket and the players playing in Laval, but for every team and every coach around the league. Wealth of information. Be sure you're following him on Twitter or X at PWilliamsAHL. So I did promise we were going to get to a prospect breakdown. First and foremost, he may not be an actual prospect for the Montreal Canadiens. In fact, he's one of the oldest guys on the team at this point. But I have to give props to Kasimir Kaskisuo for making his season debut this week and just bringing that steady, veteran, confident, calm experience to the crease for the Laval Rocket this weekend. I think his performance Friday night really set the tone for their weekend series against the Syracuse Crunch. Having Kaskisuo in the prospect breakdown has more to do with Dobeš, because I think that Dobeš, as a rookie goaltender, someone who needs to be a promising prospect for the Montreal Canadiens, I think that he could learn a lot from Kaskisuo, both in just how to be a professional athlete, both on and off the ice, in addition to just helping soak in and sponge up all of that information and knowledge, the X's and O's of technique and what to do. Stick tap to Kasimir Kaskisuo was a great way for him to get back into game action, and I think it's going to be great things for Laval in general. My other prospect breakdown positive player is Arber Xhekaj. Arber Xhekaj, it was an abrupt arrival for him in Laval, I think, and the first week or so probably wasn't the most wonderful time for Arber Xhekaj, but he seems to really be settling into his role and his environment in Laval. You can see on the ice after plays and during plays, he's smiling and chatting a lot more with his teammates. There seems to be an actual camaraderie developing there. You see him on the bench smiling and laughing and talking with his teammates on the bench. He's starting to look more comfortable, more relaxed. And this past week, he performed quite well in those 3 games. In fact, he had a goal and 3 assists just on the week last week. Now, not to mention, he also registered his first fight in the AHL. But interestingly enough, he didn't want to dance with Sean Element. In fact, he tried to skate away, and Element simply wouldn't let him back down from the fight. And so Arber Xhekaj obliged and dropped the mitts. He has reached the 10-game mark now. He's got 8 points, 2 goals and 6 assists. One of those goals was a power play goal, and he's got a game-winning goal so far on the season as well. So Arber Xhekaj is embracing the situation that he finds himself in, and I think that's going to do a lot moving forward for him to develop and accomplish the things that the Canadiens want him to accomplish in Laval. And I think the more that he does that, the sooner that he gets back to the NHL. So coming up this week, Laval has just 2 games on the schedule, Friday night and Sunday afternoon. This is a short road trip down to Utica. They'll take on the Comets in both games. That's Friday night at 7 p.m., Sunday afternoon at 3 p.m. What's interesting about this is in the month of January, we know that Utica is one of Laval's division rivals. They will play the Comets 5 times this month. 5. So this is just the first 2 of 5 meetings between the Rocket and the Comets this month. And interestingly enough, I said a little earlier in the show that Laval had finally moved up out of last place in the North Division to 6th. Well, it's Utica who has slipped down to 7th. They have had a bit of a difficult run here lately. So Laval is actually currently sitting ahead of Utica in the division standings. And this is the first 2 of 5 games that these teams will play against each other this month. If Laval can succeed in at least getting 1 win out of the 2, if not sweeping the weekend, they could start to really make some separation for themselves when it comes to the divisional standings. So this will be an exciting couple of games to watch. Of course, we'll have all of your coverage over at the Hockey News Montreal team site. You can find us at thn.com/Montreal. And of course, you want to be sure that you tap the subscribe button here as well. You never want to miss an episode of this show every Tuesday, Habs Hockey Report every Thursday, the Canadiens Connection podcast, which comes out every Monday. And hey, we have another watch-along, a live game stream watch-along coming up next week that you're not going to want to miss either. So tap that subscribe button. Speaking of the Canadiens Connection and speaking of a new year, we've heard an awful lot from all of you viewers, which we love. We love when you leave comments with all of our videos. And we've heard a lot in recent weeks about the things that you want to see change for the Montreal Canadiens in the coming new year. And Rick Stevens and myself broke down a lot of those demands that you fans have been making in the latest episode of the Canadiens Connection podcast. If you missed it, you can watch that video right here. Happy New Year, and I'll see you again next time.